Okay, hey, so before I go more in depth with my capstone today, I want to start by asking a question. So, if you think about what your normal week looks like, and you think about just 7 hours of that week, and what you could do with 7 hours, just maybe sit with that for a second. And I mention this because, according to a recent survey, more than 8 out of every 10 podcast listeners spend more than 7 hours per week tuning into podcasts, and that is from Discover Pods 2019. And I mention that because I think that's important. I think that 7 hours is a long time to be taking in media. And I think that obviously quite a few of us has probably listened to a podcast at some point in time. They're definitely growing in popularity. I think particularly now, I've definitely seen a couple pop up just through quarantine. And I think that podcasts represent an important part of media and communication. And I'll go more in depth with that further on in the presentation. But with all of this free time that everyone has at home, I definitely had some time to reflect on my time that I've spent at PLU, and particularly within the communication department. And so I wanted the project that I did for my capstone to reflect what I felt really exemplified my experience here. And so one thing that I found that kept coming up over and over again is storytelling and relationships. And one thing I've learned in all my classes is that you're telling a story. And whether that's, advertising or marketing, you're responsible for building a relationship with someone. And then so you can actually share this person's story. And you can share it, whether it's through business, in an interesting and compelling way to get the interest of other people. And because this is a pandemic and we're working from home, my dog is stuck. So just give me a minute. I'm so sorry. Okay, go please. Please go. Please. Yep. Okay. And, I'm so sorry. We've all been there. So, as I was saying, a podcast seemed like the perfect way to showcase that and showcase the idea of storytelling and relationships and how they play together with communications. So, I did a podcast for my project. I am in Professor Hoyt's multimedia production course, and the first part of the semester, we did a project, a podcast, like making a podcast, and the theme of the podcast was an underdog. And so I was actually very excited about this because I kind of knew right away who I wanted to interview and who I wanted to tell a story about. And so my podcast is about Dr. Carly Causey. She is a doctor of chiropractic in Seattle, Washington. And it's been almost 9 months now, but recently gave birth to a baby. And it was only 4 months after she gave birth that she qualified for the Can West Games in Canada, which is a sanctional CrossFit competition. And I say sanctionals because for those of you who do not understand the way that CrossFit competitions are, sanctionals are very competitive because you can qualify for the games through them if you place. So she's an athlete. She's like a very impressive athlete, and the fact that you can do that 4 months postpartum it was very interesting to hear about. And so as I thought about a podcast and storytelling, I was trying to think of a theory that could play into that. And the theory that I came up with was Stuart Hall's encoding and decoding theory. And so, obviously, encoding is the process of creating a meaningful message according to a particular code, while decoding is the process of using a code to decipher a message and formulate meaning. And the important thing here that I really want to emphasize is that the key insight of Hall's model is the recognition that, quote, the codes of encoding and decoding may not be perfectly symmetrical. And I'll touch on this a little bit later too, but this is something that I feel is really important when thinking about communications. And so when I thought about why I wanted to do this project, going back off of the storytelling and relationship building part of communication, this project seemed like I've never done a podcast before, so this was the very first time. It was something new to me, so it was something I was able to learn, with mistakes, obviously, as with anything. But it was really, really interesting, because I myself do listen to podcasts, and so hearing them and the way that they're so, you listen to big podcasts. I don't know, example one that I listen to is Chasing Excellence, and it's so smooth and edited so well. And going through the process of creating one yourself, you realize that is not particularly quite easy. It's quite time consuming and takes a lot of effort, and you have to be so, you just have to recognize every little detail about that. And so I did this project. Professor Hoyt had us download Creative Cloud, so we used Adobe Audition, and what I did was I reached out to Carly and I asked her if she'd be interested in doing this project, and then we sat down. I made interview questions before going in, and we interviewed, and then we would go back to class and we would spend class time editing, or if we needed help with anything else, then Professor Hoyt would go around helping us. So I guess 3 things that I want to reflect on that I want to highlight and I'm proud of are my preparation. But this one comes with the caution, because I was so prepared and I had so many questions listed that I almost read the questions I had instead of just having a genuine conversation. And so I would read off a script almost, and I wouldn't fully be listening. And so I wouldn't respond to her. I would just go down the list and be like, okay, next question, like a check mark, which is ironic considering that I'm doing my capstone presentation on the importance of listening in communications. But I am proud of that, and I recognize that. 2, I'm proud of the story I told. I think it's a really important story, and I think everyone should listen to it. It's really important because just, you look at the sports field right now, and there's so many women who are just starting families or are pregnant. Alex Morgan just had her baby girl, super cute. But all of these athletes plan on making a comeback. And so I think it's a really important story to just get out there, that you can have a baby, you can start a family, you can still do the things you want to do as a woman, and you can still come back and be a competitive athlete, and that you don't have to compromise your athletic identity for other particular identities, like maybe you want to be a mom. So, and then I put this one last, but I think I'm proud of this one the most, is the mistakes I made, because I made a lot of mistakes. But that's where learning happens, obviously, and that's cliche, but it is, which, leads me into the question of, well, what would you do differently if you could do it again? And so many things, probably too many to talk about, but I would do the interview and conduct the interview in a different place where there's less noise. I would probably use 2 microphones so that there were 2 audio waves instead of 1, because when you alter the audio levels, but you only have 1 audio input, it is very difficult to get the audio levels at the same wave that you want them to be. There were times where I would edit Carly's voice because her voice was a little louder than mine, and then I would talk, so I would lower her voice, increase my voice, and then I would try and lower her voice again, but they would mismatch. And so, you're probably asking, why does this matter to me? And I don't know. And that might not be the answer expected, but I think going with my theory, that's what I think is important about this, because it's important to me, the story, being able to tell the story and get it out, that's important to me, because I think it's valuable. But I think using Stuart Hall's encoding, decoding theory and, method, the whole point of this is that your interpretation of this story, you will take different things from it than I will. Maybe if you're not very into athletics, you won't take as much out of it as someone who is currently a pregnant athlete. So I think that there is mismatch, and I think that is kind of what I felt like prioritizing in my capstone, is that the ways we communicate, there's always interpretation where two people can interpret the same thing differently. And I think that podcasts are very important, considering that people spend, 7 hours or more per week tuning into them. You take what you want from it, and, you find what is important in the media, and you let that resonate with you. So what I think is important, and I think it's important to tell a story that helps other female athletes, that might not be important to you, but it doesn't mean that you won't find something important in the project or the podcast. So that's what I think is most important about doing this project, is that, we're not all going to take the same thing from it. We're not going to take the same importance from it. But it is what it is. And I think that that's a lot of what media is. We take what we want from it. And that doesn't make one wrong, one right. It just is what happens. So, that is my capstone project. You should definitely listen to the podcast. You'll see what I mean about the mistakes, but that happens. So, learn from them. Maybe in the future I'll do podcasts and I won't make the same mistakes. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Apologize for the dog thing. I'm sure we've all had that experience with dogs or kids or parents, but, yeah, so, brought to you by 2020 pandemic, wearing sweats, go Lutes.